On April 13th, the United States Navy blockaded Iran's ports in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump called it decisive action. The Pentagon called it necessary pressure. Media headlines celebrated American resolve. But here's what nobody's telling you. Iran wanted this blockade. They baited the U.S. into it. And right now, as you watch this, their trap is working exactly as planned. Let me show you how Iran just turned America's blockade into their biggest strategic win of the entire war. First, you need to understand what actually happened. When the U.S. and Israel struck Iran on February 28th, killing Supreme Leader Khamenei, Iran had one immediate response: close the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil flows through that narrow passage. Iran shut it down completely. For 6 weeks, oil prices exploded. Global trade froze. Countries that depend on Gulf oil started panicking. The entire world economy felt the squeeze. Then came the ceasefire on April 8th. Pakistan brokered a 2-week pause. Part of the deal? Iran would reopen Hormuz. Ships could move again, oil would flow. Except Iran didn't reopen it. Not really. Ships from China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iran's friends could pass. Everyone else? Blocked, or charged a $2 million toll. Iran kept control of the strait while technically honoring the ceasefire. This enraged Washington. On April 12th, peace talks in Islamabad collapsed. Vice President Vance spent 21 hours negotiating. Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, refused to stop controlling Hormuz. Talks failed. Trump's response was immediate and predictable. If Iran won't open Hormuz, we'll blockade Iran's ports ourselves. April 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the U.S. Navy blockade began. American destroyers positioned outside Iranian ports. No ships in or out of Iran. Trump called it decisive action to break Iran's stranglehold. And that's exactly when Iran's trap snapped shut. Here's what Iran understood that Washington didn't. The blockade helps Iran more than it hurts them. Let me break down why. First, oil prices. Before the blockade, Brent crude was climbing toward $100 a barrel. The moment Trump announced the blockade, it spiked past 102, and it's staying there. Who benefits from high oil prices? Russia. Russia is selling oil at record profits right now. Every dollar oil rises means billions more for Moscow. Iran and Russia have a deep partnership. Russia's been supplying Iran with military technology, satellite intelligence, possibly even nuclear assistance. High oil prices fund Russia's war in Ukraine and keep Putin's economy stable. Iran doesn't need to sell oil right now. Their economy is already devastated by 6 weeks of American bombing. But Russia does. And by keeping oil prices sky high through the blockade, Iran is handing Putin a massive strategic gift. Second, China. Beijing hasn't said much publicly, but watch what they're doing. China condemned the U.S. blockade as harmful to global interests. They're buying Iranian oil anyway, through land routes via Pakistan and Central Asia. The blockade doesn't stop China from getting oil. It just makes everyone else desperate. And desperate countries pay premium prices. China's getting cheap Iranian oil while selling their own reserves at peak prices to Europe. Beijing's playing both sides and profiting massively. Third, and this is crucial, the blockade is splitting America's alliances. Trump claimed allies would help. He said the UK and other countries were sending minesweepers. That was April 12th. By April 14th, the truth came out. The UK refused to join the blockade. So did France. Germany called it counterproductive. NATO rejected the request entirely. Instead, France and the UK announced they're planning their own separate mission to reopen Hormuz, without American involvement. They're coordinating with Oman and the UAE to create a neutral corridor that bypasses both the US blockade and Iranian control. Read that again. America's closest allies are planning to work around the US blockade. Iran just got the United States to isolate itself from its own alliance system. That's not a loss for Iran. That's a strategic masterpiece. But the trap goes even deeper. Iran's playing a waiting game, and the blockade helps them run out the clock. The ceasefire expires April 22nd. That's 8 days from now. If no deal is reached, the war restarts. But here's the thing. Iran doesn't need a deal anymore. They've already survived the worst of the bombing. US and Israeli strikes destroyed much of Iran's military infrastructure, but the regime itself is still standing. Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei, Ali's son, is in power. The government hasn't collapsed. The people aren't rebelling. Iran's leadership calculated that if they could survive the initial assault, they'd win the long game. And they were right. Because now, America is the one under pressure. Gas prices in the US are over $4 a gallon. Voters are angry. The war is unpopular. Trump's political opponents are attacking him for prolonging the conflict. The blockade is making it worse, not better, because oil isn't flowing and prices keep rising. Iran, meanwhile, is dug in. They've moved military assets underground. Their economy was already sanctioned and isolated before the war. They know how to survive under pressure. The blockade doesn't change their strategic position, but it does change America's. Every day the blockade continues, Trump loses political capital. Every day oil stays above $100 a barrel, American voters get angrier. Every day allies distance themselves. U.S. global leadership erodes. Iran doesn't need to win militarily. They just need to outlast America's political will, and the blockade is accelerating that timeline. There's one more dimension to this trap. Iran is fighting a legal war too. Iran's calling the U.S. blockade an act of piracy. They're taking it to the United Nations. They're framing themselves as the victim of American aggression. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They have a legal argument. Under international law, a blockade is an act of war. The U.S. and Iran have a ceasefire right now. By blockading Iranian ports during a ceasefire, the U.S. is technically violating the truce. Iran's not blocking ships anymore. They're just charging tolls and controlling traffic, which they argue is their sovereign right in their own territorial waters. The U.S. is the one stopping all traffic to Iranian ports. Retired Admiral James Fogo, former commander of U.S. Naval Forces Europe, told NPR that the blockade is legally considered an act of war. Even American military experts are saying this is legally problematic. Iran's leveraging this. They're positioning themselves as the reasonable party willing to negotiate, while America escalates with illegal blockades. It's working in international opinion, especially among non-Western countries. China, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, most of the Middle East, even some European voices are criticizing the blockade as disproportionate. Iran's building a narrative where they're the victim and the U.S. is the aggressor. That narrative doesn't matter much now, but it will matter when this war ends and the international order has to be rebuilt. Iran's playing for the post-war settlement, and they're winning that fight too. So where does this go? 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. The ceasefire holds, talks restart, some compromise is reached before April 22nd. Possible, but unlikely. Both sides are dug in. Iran won't give up its nuclear program. The U.S. won't accept anything less. Scenario 2. The ceasefire collapses, the war restarts. U.S. bombs more targets. Iran launches more missiles. The region descends into wider conflict. Oil hits $150 a barrel. Global recession begins. Trump faces massive domestic backlash. Iran's betting Trump won't choose this option. The political cost is too high. Scenario 3. And this is what Iran's actually counting on. The blockade continues, nothing changes, and time runs out. April 22nd comes and goes. No deal. But no major fighting either, because nobody wants to restart the bombing. The blockade stays. Iran's ports stay closed. Hormuz stays partially shut. Oil stays expensive. And the world just adjusts. Europe finds alternative energy sources. China keeps buying Iranian oil over land. Russia keeps profiting. American voters get used to expensive gas. And slowly, painfully, the blockade becomes the new normal. Iran doesn't win decisively, but they don't lose. They survive. Their regime stays in power. Their nuclear program continues underground. And 6 months from now, when everyone's exhausted and oil-dependent economies are in recession, Iran offers to reopen Hormuz in exchange for sanctions relief and international recognition of their nuclear threshold status. The U.S., economically strained and politically exhausted, takes the deal. That's the trap. Not a military victory, not a sudden reversal. Just the slow, grinding reality that Iran can outlast America's attention span and political will. The U.S. blockaded Iran thinking it was applying maximum pressure. But Iran turned that pressure into leverage. High oil prices benefit Russia and China. Alliance fractures weaken American leadership. Legal arguments undermine U.S. credibility. Political costs drain Trump's political capital. And time favors the side that's willing to endure suffering longer. Iran baited the U.S. into a blockade by refusing to reopen Hormuz. They knew Trump would react with force. They counted on it. Because the blockade doesn't solve America's problem, it makes Iran's enemies fight each other while Iran waits. Russia profits, China profits. U.S. allies break away. American voters get angry, and Iran's regime survives. That's not speculation. That's what's happening right now as this blockade enters its second day. Iran played this perfectly. They turned America's strength, military power, and economic pressure into a weakness by making the blockade hurt America's interests more than their own. And unless something changes dramatically in the next 8 days, Iran's going to walk away from this war having survived a superpower's full assault and having fractured the Western alliance in the process. That's the trap. And it's working.